The world is changing fast. New technologies are impacting how we think about products, services, and the way we live our lives. Nowhere is this trend more present than in financial services, where new business models and customer expectations are changing our conceptions about banking, finance, and the very nature of money. Welcome to Rebank, a visionary podcast about banking, fintech, and the future. The future of banking is here. Welcome to Rebank. I'm your host, Will Beeson. Thanks very much for tuning in today. We're happy to be on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud. Check us out, Rebank, Banking the Future. Subscribe, leave a review if you like the show, and definitely get in touch. We're on Twitter at Rebank Podcast, or you can connect with me, your host, directly at Will_Beeson, Beeson. We look forward to hearing from you. Today I have the great pleasure of hosting Faisal Khan, one of the world's premier experts in payments and remittances. Faisal is a banking and payments consultant providing advisory services to banks, financial services companies, and startups. He specializes in cross-border money transfer and all aspects of the value chain across B2B, B2C, and C2C. Faisal has extensive knowledge in the design, integration, and operation of payment networks and systems for international money transmission. Two things set Faisal apart in this space in my mind: his practical knowledge, based on extensive on-the-ground research across the developed and developing worlds, and the depth of his knowledge around licensing, regulatory frameworks, and compliance. Faisal is extremely active on Quora, as well as his own content-rich website, FaisalKhan.com. He is also on Twitter at Babushka99, Babushka99. I'm thrilled to have Faisal on the show today. Faisal, welcome to Rebank.
Thank you very much, Will. Very happy to be here.
Well, great. I've done my best to introduce you. I'm sure you would have a lot more to add. How would you characterize the work that you do?
I think it's best that I typically say I'm an independent banking and a payments consultant, and my specialty is cross-border. So if value or money or Bitcoin is moving across borders, could be international borders, could be state line borders, that's what I do best. And any and everything associated within that space is what I indulge in.
And that's across geographies?
Absolutely. So I have working knowledge in about 43 countries today, which includes the North America, Europe, UK, Ireland, many countries, and almost all the countries in South Asia, GCC, Africa, Southeast Asia.
Wow. You never cease to impress me.
It's a global world, right? So can't be restricted to one place.
Well, it's been a while since you and I have caught up. What's new with you? What are you working on at the moment?
At this moment, the two things that are very active in my space is one is obviously after the Brexit, everyone wants to know how they can incorporate themselves within the EU so that they can get payment institution licenses, etc., and not have reliance on UK, because they don't want to be left standing in the dark and not know what's going to happen with respect to the EEA, which is the European Economic Activity Zone. That's one, and needless to say, the US, North America, is a very, very lucrative market for many, and for money transmission, be it remittances or B2B, companies are just dying to get into it, and that's predominantly what I've been working on for the last, I think, 3 years now, and it keeps me busy.
Interesting. Payments, money transfer, and remittances have come a long way in the past few years. What are the greatest advances you've seen in the space recently?
So I think the one thing I've seen is that we are looking at more and more companies coming into the space where they are being more smartphone-driven, mobile-driven. The value that you can transfer has been reduced. It wasn't possible previously to send $20 or $25 across the border. Now it is. And I think more and more, as we go further along, we'll see more and more micro remittances or micro transfers come into play, as well as real-time settlements. So it's not like you're sending money and you're waiting for 5 days to get the money. I think it's now, you're sending money and you get it instantly. So we're seeing a lot of advances in this space.
Okay. I mean, traditionally we've worked off the back of kind of bank supported systems like SWIFT, for instance, in international payments, and surely the bulk of all international payments still goes via SWIFT. How quickly, I suppose, if at all, would you expect parallel rails to develop and really start to take meaningful market share?
It's a good question. No one knows for sure. Obviously, SWIFT would like everyone to remain with them, but I think we are seeing players like Ripple and other real-time settlement companies come in. There is the U.S. task force on faster payments. I think about 17 or 18 members are there, and they're all trying to pitch their things. I think the experimental phases are already on in some cases, and when I cite experimental, I mean very small scale, nothing major. Ripple is the one that seems to be making all the ripple, no pun intended. Right now, that's where a lot of banks are getting on board, connecting with them, seeing the benefits of real-time settlements within 8 seconds, which is what they cite. So I think in the coming years, especially after the U.S. sort of blueprints what faster payments should be, because the US is a huge market, I think we'll really get to see the forming of the industry come after that. I don't think so we will be seeing any major changes before that. SWIFT will remain. It's not going to be outcast anytime soon. You've got tens of thousands of banks worldwide using it. I think for anyone else to come and say, listen, we're going to disrupt it, yes, it's going to be disrupted. I think so. Eventually it will be. Nothing lasts forever, right? But I think it'll take some time. It's not going to happen immediately in the next 2 or 3 years. Probably transition over the next, let's say, 10 years. 10 years from now, we will, if we were to have this conversation, we would probably say, yeah, there's SWIFT, there's X, there's Y, there's Z, and so forth.
That makes a lot of sense. Payments was one of the areas that kicked off the fintech movement. As time passes, we're starting to see some of the early winners like Square and Stripe disappear from the headlines. Why is that? Is the rest of the industry catching up?
I think it's more or less that Square and Stripe have become mainstream. It's there. Everyone has it. People are implementing it. They are behind the scenes. They're doing their stuff. Fintech is such a wide word, and a world that has just so many facets to it. I think I think the industry is catching up in certain areas, lagging in certain areas, and way ahead in certain areas. But I think all that it's the media, the way they have an interest in a company for a little while, they'll do all the coverage and then they'll move on to someone else. So I think Square and Stripe and the others, like PayPal, for example, and there are many other companies in the space, they're doing very well. I think the industry is very active. Everyone loves to invest in fintech related company. I think people are also very cognizant that there are going to be a lot of failures because the models that are presented and the traction numbers that are presented, etc., really change once people start to understand that there's a huge cost for compliance, licensing, operational costs, traction, correspondent tie-up agreements, etc. When they factor in all those things on which they don't have a clarity in the start, things become very different. But I think fintech will evolve, it'll expand, the bubble may burst, and the strongest will survive.
I interviewed Chris Skinner recently, who you may know, who made the interesting point that whereas Square and Stripe and other kind of payment startups had initially been characterized as disruptors and alternative channels to banks and existing rails. Really, a lot of those companies, especially early days of fintech, were almost expanding the transaction base. So helping traditional payment systems, credit cards maybe in this case, capture a portion of transactions that they weren't able to reach before, and really kind of generating new revenues, bringing new transactions within the scope of existing rails, which is I think a very valid point, and it probably applies to a lot of fintech.
Mm-hmm. I think Chris is always on the money, and I think he's certainly on the money over here because the traditional payment rails were, POS, right? I mean, it has always been POS. I put up a picture on LinkedIn a couple of months ago, which shows a person holding a credit card and a computer in the front, and the caption was that everyone that I meet and everyone that I talk to are trying to change justice. That this particular set of circumstances where you're holding the card and trying to enter and do card not present transaction, that's what everyone is trying to disrupt. The credit card was made for a very, very different purpose. And, rightly said, people saw the advances in technology, security, authentication, ID verification, etc. And they are picking up the different parts of transaction sets that the banks had no access to. And essentially, they have become ISOs for banks, and they're going out and picking up these transactions, in-app payments, contactless payments, etc., online payments. All these things are just literally scooping up everything that's left on the floor that was not being picked up. So yeah, absolutely, very correct on that.
And speaking of some of the kind of the winners in the first wave of the fintech boom, I guess if we go kind of way back before Square and Stripe, PayPal continues to be very relevant after all these years. And it seems to me that's a function of their integration into websites as a payment option, which Apple Pay and others have announced they'll start doing.
So I think PayPal is just the darling company for everyone. It's been there for a long time. It was one of the first ones. It got the traction, the numbers, just as the web was expanding, shopping websites were expanding. PayPal was the de facto payment mechanism. Still is for many. Whether they will wane out or not, I don't think so. But it has to be taken into context. When we talk about PayPal, we are talking about a recognizable brand, right? So we're talking about something or someone in the United States or North America or Europe would know immediately when you mention PayPal. But if you go to the other parts of the world, if you go to Africa, PayPal may not be a recognized brand. If you go to South Asia, PayPal is certainly not a recognized brand. GCC, China. PayPal is huge, but if you look at a company called Ant Financial, which many people don't even know the company exists like that name. Ant is the people who make Alipay, the Alibaba company, right? And they're huge. In fact, they're valued at I think Chris Skinner said it yesterday on Breaking Bank's show. It was $60 billion or something, and that's huge. And again, a name that people just don't know. So it has to be taken into reference. In the United States, PayPal is definitely up there. Everywhere else, it's trying to expand its footprint, trying to expand its products and services. But then likewise, you have the Chinese companies, you have the Indian companies, you have other payment networks that are also trying to do the reverse. They're trying to jettison out of their territories into North America. So I think PayPal will remain. PayPal is very intelligent in the sense that they have their finger on the pulse. They have some great analytical data on users and what they want. They participate in almost all the conferences. They listen to their users, so they know what the market wants, and they slowly are changing themselves. Whether or not they will be challenged or not, remains to be seen. I think they'll see a lot of competition from Visa and MasterCard, but then PayPal went ahead and did a deal with Visa. So I think PayPal, history would say that, PayPal has to be disrupted by someone. Whether or not it's going to be Apple Pay or Google, which has really fumbled the ball in payments so many times, remains to be seen. But I think its dominance within the United States will certainly remain in the years to come.
PayPal's interesting because it's kind of so many different things to so many different people. Personally, I think I use it as an alternative to inputting my card details if I'm checking out online. For other people, it's a way of sending money around. Do you find that in different parts of the world, PayPal is used differently? There are different functionalities that are...
Yeah, certainly. And I think you agree. One of the biggest things that people, especially e-commerce merchants, don't look at, the cart abandonment rate is very, very high when you have to fill out forms. I mean, forget about the whole shopping experience. Barring that, if you actually have to do checkout, people will usually abandon carts if they see a very long form. This is why Stripe and, Square and the other guys made really, really advanced strides in their customer acquisition, because all you had to do was just put a number, name, expiry date, CVV, etc., and done. But with PayPal, the integration is so smooth that if you'll have two choices. Either you can enter all your credit card data and your address, etc., or just click on PayPal, and it takes about 5 clicks in total. 5 clicks. One, pay with PayPal, log in, approve, confirm, and take you back to your website. 5 clicks, and you're done. You don't have to input anything. So it's 5 taps or 5 clicks, and you're in and out. So I think that is a really, really big play for PayPal. But if you look at Europe, Europe has, let's look at the EU countries, 28 countries over there within the EU, and you ask, what's your unified payment system? There is none. I mean, it's preposterous, right? There is none. What's the PayPal equivalent for Europe? The answer is
I think SEPA payments via bank transfer.
Yeah, but SEPA is just purely bank transfer, right? And that is still batch. It's not real time. But if you go to Africa and say, okay, what's your or even in sub-Saharan Africa, you can say, what's your payment system? You go to South Asia, what's your payment system? There are none, and this is where PayPal absolutely rules, because they have done the hard work, and this is what people forget. Western Union, MoneyGram, or the other examples I can cite, they have done the hard work of going into each individual country, registering themselves, getting licensed, doing partnerships, and then tying that country into their global ecosystem or their PayPal network. So then it becomes sort of a seamless and a smooth transition. So you could be in UK, I could be in India, someone could be in South Africa, North America, doesn't matter. And you can send payments to each other. But they have done that hard part in going into each different territory. And that, I think, and herein lies the difference. Companies that have not done that have not been able to be successful.
In terms of shopping cart abandonment and kind of e-commerce more broadly, Apple Pay has announced website integration, and you'd be able to correct me, but Android Pay and Samsung Pay are expected to do the same. That to me seems hugely impactful. What's your view on the relevance of that going forward?
So I think that's many people underestimate as to the importance of that. It's immensely important because of two reasons. Number one, if you were on a computer doing this thing, it allows you and gives you this two-factor authentication, so that you have your phone and your computer, they are paired together. You authenticate yourself using your fingerprint and authorize the payment, and on the web the payment is done. So that's a great thing. And the second thing is, my phone is more or less with me all the time, rather than my computer or my tablet. And if I can get that same seamless payment experience with a tap, contactless, or whatever it may be, I think going forward it's going to make things a whole lot easier. And the thing that was missing out was the web. These payment systems were meant for POS machines or contactless payment devices, etc. But there wasn't a methodology to do the same thing when I came across a website or an app. And now that they've taken that challenge, I think it's going to be a huge game changer. But I say that with a caution. I feel that we are also arriving in an era where people are questioning how much they are paying for merchant fees. What's the merchant discount rate? Why should I need to pay 2.75%? Isn't there a cheaper way? This was the whole premise on how Dwolla got started in the US. Ben Milne used to sell speakers. He's the CEO of Dwolla, in case you're wondering. And he paid somewhere around $80,000 in merchant acquiring fees. And he says, this is ridiculous. As a business, I want to change that. And he did. And he created Dwolla. So I think we'll be heading somewhere down the line towards free payments. I make a case. I say, what are we going to see? Fee or free? And I'm betting that free is going to come.
That's a really interesting point. And I think the reason that that interchange fees, that merchant processing fees have traditionally been high in large part is the credit risk effectively that was being taken by credit card companies, and that I suppose makes sense when it takes time to process transactions. When you move into real-time payments, suddenly there is no credit risk. I'm assuming you're talking about irreversible payments, and as a result, do those fees still stand up?
And if you look at the millennials, most of them, and this is not just US millennials, right? I mean, you have to understand that millennials everywhere in the world. So if you look at how Brazilians are interacting, you look at especially how people from Tanzania, Kenya, India, Bangladesh, Philippines, Vietnam, etc. The millennials here, especially the younger millennials, they are very averse to taking credit. They said, no, I don't want to get into that loop. They're much more financially educated, if you will. And there is a huge awareness program that I want to spend the money I have. If you have the money and you're going to spend it into a digital network, why the fees? Why this very percentile fee? And this is where I feel that if you have 50 companies that are taking a percentage, one company is going to come in and say, okay, I'm not going to do percentage, I'm going to do a flat fee, 50 cents. Another one will come, and sooner or later, you find out that there's a sizable competition that is charging a flat fee or free. And because they can. It's not that the cost of transactions are so high, they can.
Credit card networks do seem to an extent to be at risk of disruption via these real-time payment mechanisms, and also to your point, a growing aversion amongst younger generations to credit generally. But at the same time, there are deeply vested interests in the credit card space. Banks are often shareholders of these networks, huge multinationals that are deeply financially invested. That to me doesn't sound like an industry that's likely to change overnight.
No, not at all. I think regardless of what your views may be, could be libertarian, I couldn't care less. But I think at the end of the day, you will throw in the towel. Why? Because if you're standing in a checkout at Tesco or, at Walmart or somewhere else around the world, you know that your Visa card will work. You know that your MasterCard will work. What you don't know is your card X will work or not, So you have that, it's a behavioral element that they have inculcated into the minds of the consumer. These two brands, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, China Union Pay, etc., basically signify security, adaptability, availability, network outreach, etc., for the consumer. And you can either, get grunts from people in the line when you're trying to pay with your checkbook or cash or what have you, or just swipe your card, and you will eventually throw in the towel. That's what I think. So I don't think so they're going to go out of business anytime soon. I do think that they will rethink their business.
One of the biggest trends impacting banking, financial services is a move toward open data, open APIs, and kind of the integration of services outside of these kind of monolithic structures. And we touched before on e-commerce and integration of new payment solutions into web. Apple traditionally has very much been on the side of hardware and software completely owned and configured by the company, whereas Microsoft and now Google are very much kind of on the other end of that spectrum, open access. It does seem to me like going forward, as integration across platforms becomes increasingly important for things like payments, provision of financial services, potentially things like KYC and identity verification on kind of a cross-industry shared platform, that the Apple model of closed hardware and software could potentially become a limitation.
It is. So I think one of the areas in the industry that has not improved is identity verification. It is, if you look at the basic KYC that you do today, it is a template that is over, I'd like to say 60 or 70 years old. Think about it. What do you provide? Your name, your date of birth, your address, your social security, your telephone, maybe a copy of the bill, and a photo ID. How much has that changed over the last 60 years? I think the whole area of identity verification, the whole area of KYC has not gravitated and kept up, with technology and time. Today, social elements are extremely important. I've been an advocate that I feel that it is time that we have a registry. I don't know how to put it correctly, but let's say an open registry where the government is able to contribute towards your ID. Your friends and family are able to contribute towards your ID. You are able to contribute. Your spending and your social signals are able to contribute, and people are able to contribute. So you have this very complex FICO score type an ID verification method where the government says, "Yup, this is who he is." Your friends will say, "Yup, this is who he is." Your co-workers can say that. Your LinkedIn contacts can say that. Your 6 years on Twitter will say that. Your 5 years on LinkedIn will say that. Your 3 years on Facebook will say that. And your spending patterns, your utility bill will tell you that, and so forth. So that is you have very, very high level of confidence that this person says who he or she is. And it also allows you to have a registry that is global in nature. You're not restricting yourself to some very specific, fields of post office box or address or social security, which basically is a US thing. So what about India? What about Pakistan? What about France? How does it work over there? Every country has their own variables or elements that they bring into equation. So that is one. I think KYC and ID verification is a huge restriction right now. The other thing that's going to make the whole scenario go away, rather be looked in a new light, is I think people have understood that the cost of transaction today is inherently very small. Whether Apple dominates it, whether Samsung Pay will dominate it, whether credit cards will dominate it, it's too early to say. But I feel that we are coming in like we have the internet, where we have many service providers connecting into each other. We do not have that same thing in payment networks. Case in point, there is no financial routing as such. You cannot route your PayPal payment into your M-Pesa payment. You cannot take your M-Pesa payment and route it out into Quick Cash. You can't take your Star rewards in Philippines and turn them into Square Cash equivalent in the US. That routing mechanism is not there, and you have to tie in all your payment networks, and that is missing. And until that is not there, I don't think so that these walled garden approaches of PayPal or Apple or anyone else is going to go away anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. No, on the point of the KYC register, rather the ID register, because KYC is such kind of a boring bank term. In terms of a global ID register, where would you, based on your experience in different geographies, see something like that first emerging? Is it developed world and it's a private led initiative? Is it something that grows out of kind of supporting migrants across the Middle East and Europe at this point? Is it is it emerging markets where there isn't such a maybe a well structured internal kind of database system in terms of identity?
You'd be actually very wrong when you assume that. Let me give you an example of the country I am in. I'm in Pakistan. Many people don't know, every time a citizen of Pakistan turns 18 years or above, they're required to get what is called the National Identity Card. The National Identity Card biometrically verifies you. That means all your 10 fingerprints are in the database, your iris and your facial scans are in the database. We have biometrically verified everyone over the age of 18. How more complex can you get than that? That is not available in the US. It's not available anywhere else in the world. We were the first country in the world to do this thing. So developing countries inherently have a very, very good KYC system. The question is this system, first of all, I mean, you heard about it today. Question is, do the regulators know about it? Will they take it? Will they accept it? You know, it's like the high school equivalent certificate. Will we accept your high school equivalent certificate in our country? So that is one. And the second thing is, to answer your original question as to who might be the initiator, I think we will probably start seeing it emerge from two ends, if you will. One would probably be the internet giants, you know, Facebook or someone else, and you know, with this Facebook, they would probably have some mechanism or method where you can enhance your ID verification, just like Twitter, a verified check symbol and so forth, you know, Twitter verified account or Facebook verified account. They ask for additional details. And part of those additional details is they reach out to your social signal network and see if this person is who he or she cites they are. I think we'll see the same thing from the internet giants. That's one. The second thing is we may start seeing it as a small initiative by some payment company. I don't know, could be in the emerging markets, could be in the developed markets, but we will probably start seeing it mushroom out and others start taking notice of it. If PayPal, for example, came up with this thing today, it may just raise an eyebrow at best. But eventually, when enough traction is raised and enough people from emerging markets and the developed markets start using that system, it may just be spun off altogether. So who knows?
I think this is actually kind of a nice transition into to the topic of remittances, where you obviously have huge expertise and experience. So based on your work in remittances and kind of I guess a lot of the research and analysis that I know you do on the ground in developed and developing countries, what are the kind of the biggest opportunities you see for new companies, for startups in the remittance space?
So I think the most important aspect to understand about remittances is that they are the lowest hanging fruit. They are highly competitive. People jumping in, I mean, prior to 5 years ago, it was almost impossible to send $100 across. Anything less than $100 across. It would have cost you a significant amount of your transaction. Today, it is possible. So it's like going into an economy and saying, and you know, like going into UK and saying, we will not do any transaction less than £100. You can imagine the effect that would have on the whole economy. You can't buy gum, you can't buy a liter of petrol, and so forth, or what have you. Can't buy a sandwich because everything is less than £100. But if you open the floodgates of transactions below 100 being able to be that one can do very easily, you can imagine the impact it will have on the global economy and on the local economy itself. I think the remittances are experiencing the same thing, where a person in Chicago and is working in Chicago, their wife is in Manila, she's standing at a grocery store, she is $4.80 short. She can message to her husband, send me $4.80, and he does so, and she gets it immediately. That kind of a transactionary framework doesn't exist yet. It is coming very slowly, but I feel that's the biggest area. And remittances are the lowest hanging fruit, but then there's many other areas in the value stack. There is bill payments, mobile top-ups, there is lending, saving, investment, school fees, rent, car, mortgage payments that people have to do. I think that's an area where I see a lot of people entering, which is called the value aspect of remittances, hence going up the value stack. And the third thing I'm seeing is stickiness. How do we engage and keep how do we engage our customers, and how do we keep interacting with them on a continual basis rather than once a month basis? And I see a lot of companies now questioning themselves, well, how do we increase stickiness? And stickiness no matter how you look at it, is always content. It is always content. The more it's curated for you, the more stickiness you have. And companies are now trying to see. There's a company in Canada called Frog, F-R-O-O-G, Frog as in frugal, which basically looks at how the companies can reduce the financial anxiety of every person. Every person suffers from financial anxiety. Everyone does. The degree of how much you suffer varies, but financial anxiety exists for everyone. And engagement, small value transfers, instant settlement, these are the areas that I see a lot of traction happening.
How difficult is it to innovate in an area like remittances or some of these slightly larger payments based on the licensing requirements, the compliance requirements?
So innovation is really not the issue. I mean, you could innovate, but then you'd have to question yourself and say, okay, I've innovated. Am I making money from it? I know of a particular, I'm not going to say the name, but I know of a particular company that's, was doing remittances into Africa. Eventually, it didn't work out and they gravitated towards something else. So I think a lot of people will enter the space. I keep a tab on almost every startup in the world in the remittance space. I've been doing that for the last 6 years. And I revisit every 6 months. And I see a lot of companies just drop off the radar, just drop off the charts because they no longer, they understand that they couldn't do it. So innovation is not difficult. It is making a profit from it, unless you're in it for king and country, right? But if you have to make a profit for it, that's difficult. And I tell you, again and again, many people get into the space not understanding the complexities involved, right or wrong, for licensing and compliance and banking, access to banking and so forth. So licensing, compliance, and banking, they have become so important and so expensive that it is very difficult to innovate. The only way I am seeing today that people can innovate is by going and partnering up with banks and saying, listen, you have the license, you have the banking, you have everything. We have the idea. How can we marriage ourselves together? How can we have a revenue share where you run the service for us, banking as a service, platform as a service, whatever you may want to call it, and we will provide the technology, the API, the endpoints, the marketing, etc. We won't touch the money, you touch the money, you do everything for us. That's the only methodology available today where let's face it, the day you guys get your license, I can bet you a bottom dollar, I probably might be the first one who will contact you and say, hey, listen, now that you have your license, I've got clients who would love to become your customers, not only just because they become your customers, but extend your service offering into their white label platforms that you will run.
So, I guess just to fully understand, because there are a couple different elements. In order to get to the kind of real-time, small value remittance model, while I suppose waiting through the licensing, compliance, and regulatory requirements, is it possible to do that, or are the requirements burdensome enough that there's no way we can get to a real-time, small value?
It's absolutely possible to do it, but you have to understand that you have to look at things and slice it and dice it in a very, very intricate manner. You need to be cognizant of what your options are. If you're with a payment processor that's charging you 1%, you're never going to go down, right? If they're charging you $1 to settle into another country, you're never going to go. So you have to look at your options. It is very much possible to do so, but it highly depends on the numbers. You have to get the numbers. It is not a money-making venture when you say, oh, I will only be doing 5,000 transactions per month or something. You have to break out of the mold. You have to break the ceiling, and the ceiling starts at something like maybe 50,000 or 100,000 transactions per month, and that's when you really start making the money. Anything below that, you probably won't cut it.
I've heard you talk about the concept of remittances as a service. Can you talk a bit more about that?
So yeah, that's a name I came up with, remittance as a service or money transfer as a service. So basically, if you want to start a money transfer company between two countries, you need to be licensed in one of the countries, right? And or both. And then you need banking, licensing, compliance, payment networks, processing, and so much stuff, so much more. So remittance as a service was basically something like a turnkey project. It's like putting up an email server up. You just go sign up, right? And you tell us, okay, this is the country I want to start from, and this is the country I want to terminate in. And the licensing partners that we bring provide everything else. They provide everything. They provide the API, they provide the license coverage, they provide access to banking, they provide AML, KYC, compliance, everything. And all that you're bringing is your product or your app, which is under your name, not anyone else's name, and you are integrating with the API. The API forces you to conform to the compliance and regulatory aspects that the bank has set. And you simply go into market. You don't have to apply for licenses. You don't have to invest money in big, in legal fees or compliance or filing fees or your paid up capital, etc. The bank is taking the risk on this thing, so you can inherently have a very, very short go-to-market time. I spent, I think, the better part of 3.5 years in trying to get this up and running. I tried it a couple of times, failed miserably. And then, after having lots of thought, I looked at it, say, okay, what are the mistakes I'm making? Tried it again this year. Voila. The engine.
So it's live.
Yeah. The service is live. We are offering it right now from the United States. So if you want to start a remittance company from the US to anywhere else, I should not say the word remittance company. If you want to start any app or any service that does value transfer from the US to the rest of the world, it's available. We will be expanding into Canada and EU in hopefully Q4 this year.
I mean, clearly the types of companies that could be interested in that are nearly endless. But you could totally imagine supermarket chains kind of putting together their own money transfer service via this platform. I don't know, tour operators who are supplying services from.
I wish that were the case. Right now, the interest comes in from the developing world. So people in, let's say, Nigeria, Kenya, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Philippines. So they said, they're looking at eyeing at the U.S. market and saying, how can I pick up clients from there? And they can't because they're not licensed there. With this remittance as a service, they can. And not only can they pick up clients, they can pick up clients under their own brand name. And that's the whole thing. So the biggest interest we are having is from companies or entrepreneurs or businesses in those developing countries, in those terminating markets who are coming to us. And the second one is for those who've been put out of business. So a lot of people have lost access to banking in the UK. A lot of people have lost access to banking in Europe, in Canada, even in the US. And I'm talking about actual money transfer stores. They understand the money transfer business. They just don't understand the online money transfer business. And here is where we say, okay, listen, let's do a transition. Let's break out of the caterpillar mold and let's make you a butterfly. Let's go from the brick and mortar store on which you've lost your access to banking and hence you stopped work, which you were doing for 20 years. Let's take you online. And that's what they want to do.
Well, it sounds powerful.
Mm-hmm.
How important will cryptocurrencies and blockchain be in payments and remittances in the future?
Interesting question. I think blockchain is, it's like asking how important would money in a database be. So I think databases will be important, right? The blockchain is a ledger, is a database as far as I'm concerned, and it is a data-based database, right? So I think blockchains are going to be important. We really haven't figured out what the exact use cases will be. We've speculated. We've done a lot of hand waving. We've even drawn some boxes, cut out the cardboard and so forth. But we really don't have a working prototype for something that's really going to go global. Cryptocurrencies, I'm a huge fan of it, but I'm also cognizant that there are limitations. Countries are hell-bent on regulating their environments. They perhaps don't understand the cryptocurrency environment right now, but I think it's fair to say that once they do, they will regulate it, they will bring it under their umbrella. So cryptocurrency is a novel idea right now. It has very powerful examples that can be put into play for B2B businesses, instant settlements, etc. But I don't see it taking off the way people had envisaged.
We've covered a lot today. I'm hugely appreciative of your time. I think we touched on some really interesting subjects. Before we wrap up, I'd love for you to tell people how they can get in touch, best way for people to find out more about what you're doing.
Best way is to go to my website, www.faisalkhan.com. That's FAISALKHAN.com. Fill out a contact form. I personally reply to each and every one, and I guarantee a reply, if not within minutes, but definitely within the same day. You can email me. My email is my initials, fk@faisalkhan.com, Twitter, babushka99, or Facebook. You can search me anywhere, LinkedIn, wherever you do. I personally answer all my emails. Very approachable. Don't be shy. And I'm very happy to help.
Great. Well, Faisal, thank you very much again. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much for having, and wish you all the best on this podcast, and looking forward to a further conversation in the future.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning into Rebank. If you like today's show, reach out. Follow us on Twitter at Rebank Podcast and join the conversation. For more on banking, fintech, and the future, check out our regular content at www.bankingthefuture.com.